It was not something I expected.
Mm,
And I definitely probably wouldn't have done ayahuasca if I didn't feel like it was the right time for me to do ayahuasca either.
yeah.
But it was because I had had these series of experiences where things occurred that were beyond what I could explain that led me through that path. I mean, I ended up doing ayahuasca probably 20 times over a year.
Can you get addicted? Is it like a drug or it's not addictive? Welcome, Bjorn, to the show. I'm so excited to talk about sound healing and your ayahuasca experience. Some people have a great experience, some people hate it, and so curious, like, how did that even happen that you find yourself with shamans?
It was kind of a gradual thing. I was living in this place called Tulum in Mexico, and there's a very strong influence of different shamanic traditions there. And so I had been exploring different healing modalities a month or two, and one of my teachers suggested that I try ayahuasca, and there happened to be these shamans from an indigenous tribe called the Hunikun that were in town doing ceremonies. And so I'd heard that if you're going to do ayahuasca for the first time, it's best that you are able to do it with shamans that really understand it, that are leading the ceremony. And so I saw it as a great opportunity to do it.
How is it like? I've heard some stuff about ayahuasca. Some like, is it like you have memories from past or future visions? How does this all of it go?
So it just totally depends on the individual. Some people, they won't feel anything at all. It does happen.
Really?
Some people will
Even
be
if they do
outside.
it with like a very experienced shaman, they don't feel anything that can happen.
Yes,
Okay.
because it comes down to the individual, what their collective past is. Maybe they have a trauma they're not ready to deal with, and the medicine won't even open them up. I mean, that's more unusual, but it does happen. Some people, when they take ayahuasca, they are and purging and have to go outside and are just a wreck. Some people, they take the ayahuasca and they feel really amazing, and they just a very light, wonderful experience. It just totally depends on the person, and it varies a lot. If you have 20 people in a ceremony, nobody's experience is going to be the same, you know?
How was yours?
So so it was about 25 of us that were there. The guy who was serving the ayahuasca, his name was Ikakuru. He had been serving ayahuasca, I think, since he was about 11 years old. And he served the first. So they do the Hunikun. They do multiple rounds of ayahuasca. So they served the first round, and then everyone just sort of gathered around on the floor. And the Ikakura and I believe it was his daughter, if I'm remembering right, they were doing these traditional Hunikun chants, and then this went on for a long time. And I was kind of sitting there thinking to myself, I'm not really feeling this too much. I don't see what the big deal is. So then they served eventually the second round of medicine. And after the second round, I'm feeling, maybe I'm feeling a little more relaxed, feeling pretty good. And they were still doing the traditional chants. And finally, I decided, I'm just going to stand up and go outside by the fire and, whatever. So I stand up and I noticed they gave everybody a little bucket in case you had to throw up. So I took
Mm,
my little bucket with me. I didn't know if I'd need it or not. And I walked outside and I was standing there by the fire, and I saw one of my teachers out there who was at the ceremony. And he looks at me, looks down at my bucket, and he says, "Put that down. You don't need that." And he walks inside. So I'm standing out there by the fire by myself, and suddenly I just feel liberated. And I start dancing by the fire by myself, and then I started looking at the fire. The next thing I know, the ayahuasca just all hits me at once. I was looking at the fire, and then I just sort of had this moment where I fell like in love with the fire, kind of. It was like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So I got down on the ground and I just kind of laid there and curled up next to the fire, and I just started laughing. And then a little bit later, I don't know how much later, I hear another sound of laughter, like that's answering mine. And so the laughing is going back and forth for a little while. And then eventually I learned that there was, yeah, someone else there the whole time. And that person and I are now very good friends.
That's so cool.
So, yeah, it was quite something to have it sort of just hit me so succinctly in one moment. It just, you know,
Did you So I know the background was that you were dealing with a lot of chronic pain. So can you
I
talk
was, yeah.
about that a little bit? Because like before Tulum, like you were living there, you were just how long you were there, why did you go there, and what was the motivation to start even healing? Because so many people struggle with chronic pain. And when did you realize your chronic pain was something you need to heal emotionally? Because not many people go to that realization. Or maybe that was not your realization. So tell me more, please.
Yeah, I had some pretty bad back pain that I had gotten from an accident I had about almost 20 years before. And so I had to go get chiropractic adjustments, usually once a week or something. And then I had started to develop this really, really uncomfortable form of arthritis in my knees that was like every time I would be sitting down, if I was sitting for more than a couple of minutes, I would need to straighten my legs out just to relieve the stiffness that was sort of setting in. So those were the two main things. And I went to Tulum mainly because it was one of the few places I could travel to that this was during peak COVID, and they were one of the places you could go that had fewer restrictions. And so that was appealing to me at the time. Tulum had been on my bucket list, a travel bucket list for a while because I'd been traveling around the world and I lived in like 15 different countries over like 5 years, but I hadn't been there yet. And so a friend of mine invited me down there and I went. I didn't really have any intention consciously of exploring healing for my physical body or emotional or anything like that. It wasn't until I got to Tulum and then my friend, the one that invited me down there, he had an accident with his foot where his big toe got severely bruised to the point where the toenail was, just black. And so pretty much everyone who saw him would say, you know that your toenail's going to fall off, right? Because it was, just so obvious. So I saw him, I had just seen him 2 days prior, and I saw him again, and he told me, look at my toe. And I looked at his toe, and his toe was completely normal. There was no discoloration, no nothing. The toenail was all intact. And I'm like, how could that have happened like that? And he told me that he'd gone to this energy healing ceremony that was there called the Light Portal, and that's what happened when he went through it. And so I had to try that for myself. I didn't have any sort of physical healing take place at the ceremony, but it did give me kind of a release emotionally. And so I set up a private session with two of the facilitators to try and explore the work a little more. And so during the private session, one of them was working on my physical body, doing like for like an hour and a half, like working on blockages and stuff like that, like really digging in. And then the three of us had a talk. And then her partner served me a plant medicine called hape, which is it's like a type of snuff, but it has a psychoactive component to it. So one person, if you have like what's called a tepe, one person will put it in their nose and the other person on the other end blows. So he served me the hape and then he stood behind me and shaking maracas in my ears. So my mind there's too much noise for my mind to be able to take control of the situation. So he's shaking maracas in my ears and then he started making these chanting sounds and it was very activating for me because normally my mind would take over and try and rationalize what's going on, but I wasn't able to. And so then I started making chanting sounds myself and then I couldn't stop. And then I got sick
Sick, like
and threw up.
physically.
Yeah, I threw up a lot and was laying on the
So
floor for,
depending on how much you eat before or not, people might still throw up even if they have not eaten anything.
is possibly, yeah.
Okay. So it's like
So
clean
I got sick
land.
on the floor, right? And was laying on the floor for hours. I didn't even want to get up and lay on the couch. And then the next morning, I noticed that all of the stiffness and pain from my knees was gone.
And did it
Yeah,
stay like that?
it did.
Did they like this is just purely physical experience? They're not telling you, yes, like this is because you this is happening because of this trauma, that trauma. They're just like physically cleansing you their own ways.
Yes and no.
Do they ask any questions? Do you know how like psychologists ask you questions? Is it like purely physical or did they ask you questions prior to the experience?
Somewhere in between. They asked me a few questions, but it wasn't like as detailed as like a psychological type of evaluation. It was just more some basic details. And then after Ina had worked on my body and before they served me the plant medicine, she talked a little bit about what she saw because she's a seer. So she would say stuff like, I saw these emotions from your mother's side and this from your father's side. And I can hear the guides that I saw. I saw a jaguar and I saw a Native American shaman. Once we had that talk, then we moved into the hape medicine side of it.
That's so interesting. I was always thinking with all those experiences, and what you said is so aligned with what I was thinking that, like, you get the experience, like, where you are at your spiritual journey, it's what kind of experience you have. And when you said, like, if some people are not open to healing, they won't have any experience. So I think when you saw your friend's toe healed, you were kind of like believing that you can heal too. So maybe that's why it worked for you too. Because I don't think if you were like, this is not gonna work, if you didn't believe at all, maybe you were have been closed up to the healing energy. But that's so
Well,
interesting how this happened and your pain went away or the stiffness.
it was not something I expected.
Mm.
And I definitely probably wouldn't have done ayahuasca if I didn't feel like it was the right time for me to do ayahuasca either.
Yeah.
But it was because I had had these series of experiences where things occurred that were beyond what I could explain that led me through that path. I mean, I ended up doing ayahuasca probably 20 times over a year.
Can you get addicted? Is it like a drug or it's not addicting?
Some people, I don't know. I don't believe that it's physically addictive, but some people get sort of emotionally dependent on using it. And because, like, you do ayahuasca and the medicine's very strong and it opens the heart and it clears your perception, opens your perception so you can see things you wouldn't maybe normally observe. And so some people they think, well, I need to constantly be back in this state that I'm in right now because this is my natural state. So they'll can just keep taking ayahuasca to recreate that. But the real power of doing something like that is the integration afterward and learning how to apply what you learned into your old life.
Mm. Yeah, that's why I asked you if it went away because it's like sometimes people have cancer, they make operations, but the cancer comes back. As it is with the healing things, sometimes people heal, but because they have not healed the cause, the problem or challenge comes back. Let's talk about sound healing because we don't have a lot of time left and I really want to cover this. You talk about sound healing, and as I mentioned in the beginning, that's the first time I ever heard about sound healing. What is sound healing, if you can explain for people, and what kind of sound healing are you personally? Do you say like using or what kind of sound healing are you healing with? Please tell me.
So sound healing is something that's actually been around for thousands of years. And when most people think of it, they think of sound healing, they think of like a Tibetan monk with like one of those like giant bowls and they're playing the bowl and the bowl's emitting a certain sound or frequency. So there's most sound healing that people think of is like that. It involves certain instruments like for example, with Australians, they have these things called a didgeridoo, and it's this giant wooden instrument, and they blow into it, and it makes this really deep sound. But sound healing is all about creating resonance. Now, my particular type of sound healing is not very normal. It's more of shamanic sound healing. So through the experiences I had, I learned to connect with my own guides and to bring forward my own healing abilities. And so this comes forward through my voice and through the words that come through as I'm chanting or singing. So I'm bringing forward on different frequencies, different rhythms, and different words all at the same time that works with the, we'll call it the quantum field, and holds space for people to be able to, you could say, recalibrate, recharge, reassess, just depends on the person, and and then bring them back into their body.
I've listened to it on your website, and like you call it Blue Dragon.
Blue Dragon Healing, yep.
Blue Dragon Healing. The website will be down in the show notes. And as I mentioned before, when I first listened, like first second, I was like, "What is this?" Because it's something different that I never heard. And what happens when we hear something different? We are like, "Okay, what is this?" But then as I kept listening to it, again, it was early in the morning. I think it was 7 a.m. And I was like, I really, really enjoyed it, and it was so strange because I didn't expect the shamanic sounds to bring such harmony into like my soul, which I would really recommend people trying it, because maybe it is for not for you or for you, but it's amazing. Speaking of what's for you and what's for not you, you have traveled so much and tried these healing modalities, as you have also lived in Tulum, where so many stories that you've heard, I'm pretty sure, about other healing modalities. How can people identify and find their own healing modality? Because maybe half of the listeners will listen to the sound healing and it's for them. Maybe for someone it's ayahuasca. But how do you find what's for you?
So I can't speak for everyone, but I do know that a lot of people start with a practice of automatic writing, where you create a ritual for yourself, and then part of that ritual is you sit there with, a pen, and you allow yourself to write whatever words flow into your mind as they come. And if you practice it, then you can eventually learn to channel. And then the signals can start coming through more and more and more. The more you stick with it, and eventually person can then realize more about the direction of what their gifts really are and how to use them. Now, there are some hacks to do it, because when you go into that state to channel, you do kind of need to learn how to slow your mind down, slow your brain waves down. You want to be in kind of a theta brainwave type of a state. So you can use like theta or like binaural beat music and listen to it while you do it, or you can actually listen to my work as well, because my sound healing work induces a theta state as well.
That's really interesting. With the theta state, when it's inducing it, is it like you have to like lay down for it to be induced, or you can be doing something and still be in theta, or you should be like in deep meditation to like hit theta state?
Well, for most people, being in a theta state, they're not going to be doing very much. So we're naturally in a theta state basically as children until roughly age 7 or
What kind
so.
of state is it?
It's a state where you're more open. Your mind isn't spinning so fast. Your mind is much slower, more calm, and you're bringing in more creativity into your.
That's interesting. I would love to research that because I have a child. He's 7. That's so interesting. You have experienced like different tribes. So, what's the most important lesson that comes to you, or one of the most important experiences that you had throughout the journey?
What just comes up for me a lot is to be patient with myself and gentle, because it's so very easy to get into these different scenarios and create an expectation of what you want to experience. And when doing that, it takes away from the sacredness of what you are experiencing.
And when you mean gentle, not to ask too much from yourself, or what do you mean by gentle?
Kind of like if you do something and you hear that voice inside yourself judging it, to be self-aware of that and change it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also had to teach myself. I'm not at the perfect place, but I was asking so much for myself. As a first child, I was always trying to hit the perfection, and that's tiring. So yeah, being gentle with ourselves and more patient sounds so healing itself. If people want to find more about you, if people want to learn more about sound healing and your story, where can people do that?
They can go to my website. I have all of my resources all there. Blue Dragon Healing.
Yes, we'll put down in the show notes. And also, this is not something we talked about while we started recording. When you woke up so early, it's like you woke up at like 5 p.m. to record this conversation for us. So I'm extremely grateful for that and for your time and for this shamanic music that you are creating, because I personally really liked it. And I remember you had a longer one, which I can download because I only listen to the short one. So I'm gonna listen to that later this evening. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you so much for sharing your experience with ayahuasca and sound healing.
Thank you for having me.
And have an amazing day or night for the listeners wherever you are. And until next time.